I know that everybody's tired of hearing philosophical arguments and squawking and stuff, but this maybe is a different perspective, so I'm hoping you listen for a couple minutes.
Kristen Nelson seemed to be living the dream. She rose to fame, married one of Hollywood's most admired and successful stars, and together they built what looked like the perfect family. To millions, their life represented love, wealth, and everything success was supposed to bring. But behind that picture-perfect image, something was quietly falling apart. As the years passed, the cracks grew impossible to hide, setting off a chain of events that would change the family's future forever. The death nobody noticed. When Kristen Nelson died of a sudden heart attack in Santa Fe on April 27, 2018, the world had largely moved on from her. She was not a trending topic. She was not a household name anymore. She was a 72-year-old painter living in the American Southwest, selling her brightly colored primitive-style artwork through a gallery called Cody Contemporary, and spending most of her time in the kind of solitude that she had spent her entire young life running from. Tracy Nelson, her eldest daughter, announced the death on Facebook on May 1st, 4 days after it happened. Tracy used two words that carry more weight than they seem to on the surface: sudden, unexpected. Those two words tell you that nobody saw this coming, and they also tell you something else. They tell you that Kristen Nelson was not surrounded by the kind of apparatus that famous people usually have around them at the end. And yet, what most people did not know, and what most obituaries failed to mention, is that Kristen Nelson had spent the final 2 decades of her life doing something remarkable. She had become a serious artist. Her paintings, done in the American primitive tradition, and compared by critics to the work of Grandma Moses, were collected by some of the most famous people in the world. Jacqueline Kennedy herself had purchased one of Kristen's paintings called When the Kennedys Were in the White House, a piece Kristen had painted in 1964 when she was barely 19 years old. Mia Farrow, her childhood best friend from Marymount High School, collected her work. So did actress Tyne Daly and musician Dwight Yoakam. Her oil paintings had sold for up to $5,000 each, as far back as the 1970s. In 1997, she had published a coffee table-sized autobiography called Out of My Mind, a book that combined over 100 of her paintings with diary entries, poems, and photographs that documented her entire life. The title came from something her father, football legend Tom Harmon, used to say to her whenever she did anything creative or unexpected as a child. He would look at her and say, "You are out of your mind." Her high school yearbook had a line beneath her photograph that read, "Chris is out of her mind," with a list of all the artistic things she had accomplished before she even graduated. The woman who died quietly in Santa Fe was once the 17-year-old bride at the center of America's most talked-about celebrity wedding. But to understand how her life took such an unexpected turn, you first have to understand the man she married. The marriage that consumed two people. Eric Hilliard Nelson was born on May 8, 1940, in Teaneck, New Jersey. His father, Ozzie Nelson, was a big band leader who had married his vocalist, Harriet Hilliard. The family's radio show transferred to television in 1952 and ran until 1966, making it one of the longest-running sitcoms in American history. The show created something unprecedented in American culture, a family that was simultaneously a real family and a television family, playing exaggerated versions of themselves for nearly 2 decades, while the entire country watched them grow up. Ricky began recording music at 16 after wanting to impress a girl by casually mentioning he was recording at the same label as Elvis Presley. His first single reached number 4. His second went to number 1. By 17, he was one of the most commercially successful recording artists in America. But here is what rarely gets discussed. Cultural historians have noted that the real Ozzie Nelson was nothing like his on-screen persona. He was described as an authoritarian figure who controlled every aspect of his children's lives. Ozzie managed Ricky's music career with the same iron grip he brought to the television show, shaping it, packaging it, and ensuring it served the family brand. Ricky Nelson was simultaneously a genuine musical talent who would later record some of the most respected roots, rock, and country rock of his generation, and a product that had been manufactured before he was old enough to understand what was being done to him. And Kristen married this man at 17. She married a person whose public identity had been constructed for him before he reached adulthood. A person who was still fighting at 22 for the right to be something other than the character his father had written. What followed was a marriage that looked flawless from the outside and was deteriorating from the very beginning on the inside. In a 1987 cover story for People magazine, Kristen described what happened with a directness that still stings when you read it today. She said they were hippie rock and rollers who did what everyone else was doing. She said she tried to save the marriage by joining Ricky on the road, by trying to be one of the guys, by immersing herself in the touring life that was pulling them apart. She said that after a while, they were both totally messed up. She got into therapy. So did Ricky, for a while, but then he stopped showing up. She tried telling her family there was a substance problem and they all needed to help. But her parents, she said, totally denied there was anything wrong. By 1975, the marriage was effectively over. In 1977, while Ricky was on tour, Kristen moved his belongings out of the family home and into a rented house. Less than a month later, she found him in that rented house with 2 Los Angeles Rams cheerleaders. Ricky later claimed she had set the entire thing up so she could use it against him in court. She filed for divorce in October 1977, asking for custody, alimony, and a share of the community property. The couple temporarily reconciled, a pattern that anyone who has watched a marriage collapse in slow motion will recognize. In April 1980, in a move that defied all logic, they purchased Errol Flynn's former Mulholland Drive estate for $750,000, an extraordinary purchase for a couple whose marriage was already shattered and whose finances were already strained. Kristen filed for divorce a second time in October 1980. This time, she did not withdraw the petition. The proceedings dragged on for 2 years, consumed over $1 million in legal fees, and were covered extensively by the California press. When it was finalized on December 27, 1982, both parties emerged in significantly worse financial shape than when they started. Kristen's family blamed her. She told people, "They always blamed me for everything. As Roman Catholics, they have never forgiven me for getting the divorce, and they have never forgiven me for not being perfect." That sentence, from a woman who had been raised in a family that expected perfection, who had married into a family that manufactured it on camera, tells you everything about the pressure that had been crushing Kristen Nelson since she was 17 years old. The divorce had shattered everything. But what came next, on the last afternoon of 1985, would make everything that had already happened feel like it was only the beginning. New Year's Eve, 1985. Whatever the marriage had been, and whatever Kristen and Ricky's relationship had become in the 3 years since their divorce, December 31st, 1985, ended everything with the kind of finality that only death can provide. Ricky Nelson, 45 years old, was traveling with his Stone Canyon Band and his fiancée, Helen Blair, from Guntersville, Alabama, to Dallas Love Field for a New Year's Eve concert. They were flying in a converted Douglas DC-3, a World War II-era aircraft that had previously been owned by the DuPont family and, at one point, by rock and roll wildman Jerry Lee Lewis. The plane had documented mechanical problems in the days leading up to the flight. Rick had purchased the aircraft in May of 1985, but had never even re-registered it with the FAA, as required by federal regulation. At 5:08 in the afternoon, the pilot contacted Fort Worth Air Route Traffic Control Center with words that sound deceptively calm on the transcript. He said he thought he would like to turn around and head for Texarkana because he had a little problem. 3 minutes later, at 5:11, a second transmission reported smoke in the cockpit. By 5:14, the aircraft disappeared from radar. Witnesses on the ground near DeKalb, Texas, watched the plane come down in a left turn, trailing smoke, small pieces of metal falling off and starting fires on the ground below. The DC-3 struck power lines, hit a utility pole and several trees, and crashed into a farm pasture belonging to a woman named Navelle Woodard, who looked out her window and saw the plane in her field engulfed in flames. The pilot and co-pilot escaped through the cockpit windows, severely burned. All 7 passengers, Ricky Nelson, Helen Blair, and the 5 members of the Stone Canyon Band, were killed. The National Transportation Safety Board launched an 18-month investigation. There was immediate and widespread speculation that freebase substance had caused the fire, fueled by preliminary toxicology reports that found traces of substance in the bodies of several passengers, including Ricky. But the NTSB's final report identified a faulty cabin heater as the most probable cause of the fire that brought the aircraft down. No evidence of substance use during the flight was found. The substance use rumors, however, haunted the Nelson family for years and caused real damage to the children who were still trying to process the loss of their father. Kristen was 40 years old when she received the news. She had been divorced from Ricky for 3 years. Whatever they had done to each other during the marriage and the divorce, he was the father of her 4 children, the man whose life had been woven into hers since she was 12 years old. His death removed any possibility of the kind of eventual peace that divorced parents sometimes find when their children grow up, and the acute conflict of the custody years fades. That peace was gone forever. The funeral was, by multiple accounts, a scene of raw, visible conflict. An argument erupted between Kristen and her eldest daughter Tracy that became physical, with accounts describing Kristen throwing Tracy to the ground and striking her with her purse. It was the kind of scene that should have been private, but instead became part of the documented record of this family's public disintegration. Kristen approached Ricky's brother, David Nelson, who was administering the estate, about a share of the life insurance and assets. David's priority was the 4 children. The judge who heard Kristen's petition rejected it. There was nothing for her from the estate of the man she had spent half her life with, beyond what had already been settled in the divorce. Kristin Nelson inherited nothing. Her 4 children inherited what remained of their father's estate. Kristen was 40, divorced, grieving, broke, and already deep in the grip of addiction when a 12-year-old boy picked up a telephone and made a call that would fracture the Harmon family in a way that nobody involved has ever fully recovered from. The boy who called his uncle. Sam Hilliard Nelson was born on August 29, 1974, the youngest of Kristen and Ricky's 4 children, and by far the one who absorbed the most damage. He was the child who arrived into a marriage that was already crumbling. He was 6 years old when his parents began their final divorce proceedings. He was 8 when the divorce was finalized. He was 11 when his father died in a burning plane on New Year's Eve. And between the divorce and his father's death, he had been passed between family members like a package that nobody quite knew where to put. During the divorce battle, Sam was cared for by his Aunt Kelly Harmon. Then he spent 18 months with his maternal grandparents, Tom and Elise Harmon. Then he went to live with his uncle Mark Harmon and Mark's wife, actress Pam Dauber, who was famous in her own right for the television series Mork and Mindy. By the time Sam was 13, he had lived in multiple households managed by multiple adults with varying degrees of stability. And the addiction that had been building inside his mother throughout the marriage had not gone away after the divorce. It had intensified. Kristen herself admitted to People magazine that during the divorce years, she consumed substances and drank quite heavily. She was too inebriated to paint, which had been the one thing that was truly hers. She took a job as an assistant casting director just to survive financially. Gunnar Nelson, one of the twins, later spoke about those years with the kind of bluntness that tells you how deep the scars went. He said that before their parents separated, his mother started drinking really heavily. She went to AA, he said, but there were drunken battles that none of us will ever forget. After Ricky's death in 1985, things got worse. Kristen's behavior became increasingly erratic, and Sam, still a child, was the one left directly in the path of it. One day, the 12-year-old picked up the phone and called his Uncle Mark. His Aunt Kelly told People magazine what Sam said on that call. He said, "Help me. Get me out of here. I cannot take it anymore. My mother is like a hill. First she is up, then she is down." When you hear a 12-year-old describe his own mother in those terms, you understand that this was not a minor domestic problem. This was a child asking for rescue. Mark Harmon found Kristen at a grocery store shortly afterward and believed she was visibly inebriated, a claim Kristen has always denied, insisting she was simply exhausted. Nevertheless, Mark convinced his sister to check into New Beginnings, a rehabilitation facility at Century City in Los Angeles. Kristen later described the moment with genuine emotion. She said nobody but her brother could have talked her into it because she trusted him. A voice inside her said, "For once in your life, let somebody help you." She completed the 30-day program. She came out feeling proud, feeling like she had accomplished something real. And then, on the day she left the facility, she was told that Mark and Pam Dauber had petitioned a California court for permanent custody of Sam. She later told a reporter that she was feeling very proud and happy because she had just very successfully completed a program to help herself. And then suddenly, she had 2 hours to find a lawyer who would help her keep her son. At first, she said she thought it was a joke. She wondered where the punchline was. The evidence presented in the custody hearing was devastating. Sam's own psychiatrist testified that the boy depicted his mother as a dragon, not in the sense of strength, but in the sense of danger and unpredictability. The 13-year-old described his mother's mood swings as frightening and said she prevented him from seeing his siblings. Kristen fought back with the only weapon available to her. She alleged publicly that Pam Dauber used substance, a calculated attack on the other side's credibility that carried enough weight to change the trajectory of the case. Mark Harmon's attorney eventually told Kristen's lawyer that they did not want the issue to persist any further. "Too much blood has been spilled," he said. Mark dropped the full custody petition. The resolution left Kristen with custody of Sam. Mark was granted visitation rights. All three agreed to enter family therapy, and Kristen was ordered to stay 200 yards from Mark and Pam's home and from Pam's workplace. The family survived the custody battle, but surviving something and recovering from it are very different things. While Kristen was fighting to keep her youngest child, her eldest daughter was receiving news in a doctor's office that would connect Tracy Nelson to the stress and devastation of this family's collapse in the most terrifying way possible. What happened to the 4 children? The 4 children of Kristen and Ricky Nelson are the truest measure of what their parents' marriage produced. Not the television appearances, not the record sales, not the Mulholland Drive estate. The people who came out of it, and what they did with what they were given. Tracy Kristin Nelson, born October 25, 1963, 6 months after the wedding, was the firstborn and the one who inherited equal parts of both parents' intensity. She had her first screen credit before she could read, appearing in the 1968 film Yours, Mine and Ours alongside Lucille Ball at 4 years old. She trained in ballet for 17 years and became a professional dancer. She acted opposite Sarah Jessica Parker in the television series Square Pegs. She appeared in Down and Out in Beverly Hills, in Saint Elsewhere, in Family Ties, and then landed the role she became best known for, Sister Stephanie in Father Dowling Mysteries from 1989 to 1991. But behind every professional achievement, Tracy was carrying the weight of everything that had happened inside her family. In July 1987, Tracy married actor William R. Moses. 5 months later, in December, she was diagnosed with stage 2 Hodgkin's lymphoma. She was 24 years old. She underwent a grueling 7-hour surgery that removed her spleen, a portion of her liver, and samples of her lymph nodes. She was left with a 15-inch scar across her body. She later said she believed the cancer was caused by the extraordinary stress of her father's death and the custody battle between her mother and uncle that was tearing the family apart at the same time. The cancer went into remission after surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. But it was not finished with her. In 2005, Tracy was diagnosed with thyroid cancer, a consequence of the radiation treatment she had received decades earlier. In 2010, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She survived all three, underwent a bilateral mastectomy and complete reconstruction, and became a passionate advocate for cancer research. She received the Jill Ireland Award from the Amy Caron Cancer Fund for Children. Tracy and William Moses divorced in 1997 after 10 years of marriage. She has a daughter, Remington Elizabeth Moses, and a son, Elijah Nelson Clark. Gunnar Eric and Matthew Gray Nelson, the twins, born September 20, 1967, lost their father when they were 18. They had moved in with Ricky just 3 months before the crash. Whatever complications existed in Ricky's personal life, the twins were devoted to him as a father and as a musician. Shortly after his death, they made a conscious decision to carry his legacy forward through their own music. They formed the band Nelson, and in 1990, their debut album After the Rain went double platinum. Their single Love and Affection reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, making them the first act in history to have a #1 hit when their parent also had a #1 hit. Ricky had reached #1 with Poor Little Fool in 1958. The twins reached #1 32 years later. They were listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the only family to achieve #1 record status in 3 successive generations, counting their grandparents Ozzie and Harriet. They continue to perform and tour as of 2025, including shows under the name Ricky Nelson Remembered as a tribute to their father. They run their own label, Stone Canyon Records, and have been developing an autobiography titled What Happened to Your Hair. And then there is Sam Hilliard Nelson, the youngest, the most damaged. The one who at 13 was described by his own psychiatrist as depicting his mother as a dragon. Sam earned a psychology degree, which tells you something about a person who grew up watching the adults around him collapse. He formed a band called H is Orange. On the 30th anniversary of his father's death, on December 31, 2015, he released a 9-song tribute EP called Pop Songs, tribute to Rick Nelson. He described the experience of losing his father at 11 as surreal, saying it had been just days since he had seen his father on Christmas. The loss left him, by his own admission, feeling lost and wondering who he was. But he found what he called a crutch in the music, history, and photographs his father left behind. He now serves as one of the principals of his father's estate. And in 2016, he told a reporter something that carries the weight of decades of pain that had been processed and, at least partially, set down. He said that as you get older, things that were important are not important anymore. Problems are not problems anymore. You work through them or you do not, but for the most part, you hope to. He said he believed he and his mother were in a good way together and had a good relationship. All 4 children survived the wreckage of their parents' marriage and found their own ways forward. But the woman who gave them life still had one more chapter left, the one where she finally stopped being someone's wife, someone's sister, someone's cautionary tale, and became the person she had been trying to be since she was 17 years old. The painter in Santa Fe. In 1988, 1 year after the custody battle over Sam, Kristen married for the second time. Her new husband was Mark Tinker, a television producer and director who worked across multiple successful dramatic series. He was a serious professional figure, not a celebrity by association. And early in their relationship, he asked her a question that nobody in Kristen's life had ever really asked her before. He asked her what she wanted to do with her life. She told him she wanted to paint. The thing that most people do not realize is that Kristen Nelson had been painting since she was 17 years old. She had her first solo exhibition in 1967, when she was 22, during the middle of her marriage to Ricky, years before the worst of the addiction, years before the divorce and the custody battles and the plane crash. The painting had never stopped. It had continued quietly and persistently through every catastrophe. Even during the worst years of her substance abuse, when she was, by her own admission, too inebriated to paint consistently, the art was still there. It was the one thing that was always hers, that nobody else could claim or control or manufacture for public consumption. Kristin and Mark Tinker divorced in 2000 after 12 years of marriage. And after that second divorce, Kristin did something that changed the final chapter of her life entirely. She moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico. She had first visited New Mexico with Ricky back in 1970, when he had a gig in Taos. On a subsequent trip, she visited Santa Fe and was so taken with the place that she did not want to go home. It took her 30 more years to finally get there permanently, but when she did, she stayed. She said it herself in a 1998 documentary about the Nelson family. She said she had spent her whole life fighting the fairy tale, first trying to be it, then trying to tell the truth. The fairy tale had a specific address. It was the address of a television show that ran 14 seasons. It was the address of a Mulholland Drive estate that had once belonged to Errol Flynn. It was the address of a Catholic church in Los Angeles, where a 17-year-old girl married a 22-year-old rock star with a baby already on the way, and the American public watching everything they did. The truth was the addiction, the divorce, the custody battles, the funeral where she fought with her daughter while cameras circled, the judge who rejected her claim on the estate, the rehabilitation that her brother's intervention made possible, and that cost her the child she fought him to keep. And then there was the final truth, the quiet one, the Santa Fe truth. Kristen Nelson, alone in her studio, painting pictures that sold to collectors, writing poems that went into a book that documented her life on her own terms. She was not reconciled with everyone from her past. The relationship with her brother Mark remained complicated by the 1987 custody battle, but her relationship with Sam had improved over the years. Her eldest daughter Tracy had survived cancer 3 times and continued working in the industry that all 4 Nelson children had entered. The twins were touring and performing and honoring their father's legacy. The family had not arrived at perfect peace, but it had arrived at something. When Kristen Nelson died on April 27, 2018, of a sudden heart attack in her home in Santa Fe, she was 72 years old, and she had been fighting the fairy tale since she was 17. She never completely won, but she never stopped fighting. And at the end, she was doing it on her own terms, in her own house, making work that was entirely hers. For someone who spent the first half of her life defined by other people's stories, her father's athletic legacy, her brother's television career, her husband's rock and roll fame, her ex-husband's devastating death, the last chapter in Santa Fe was the chapter that was finally, fully, unambiguously hers. She deserved more of it. Let us know in the comments what you think about Kristen Nelson's story and which part of her life surprised you the most. We will see you in the next one.